So, what's the point of having an LMC or GP subcommittee? Why do we have them at all? And they were formed out of necessity. And I really sum it up with this: it's helping GPs to work at the top of their game. They were always about trying to help GPs to work in a complicated environment so they could get on with their job better, feel good about it as well, but actually achieve more. So really that's what we're about, trying to make sure GPs can work at the top of their game and enjoy it as well. So thinking about what it means to you and how do we get there. So a lot of it's about striving. You have to have motivation and a desire for things to get better. And before you even start this kind of work, there's got to be something that binds you in, because you're here on a Saturday afternoon. Okay? There are other things to do even on a day like this. So there's got to be something that binds you in, that gives you a passion or burns, that makes you think, I think this is a worthwhile endeavour. So it's absolutely key that there are people who are striving to make the world a better place for GPs and our patients, because that comes along with it. And it's important to look at the past, dull though it can be. And this is just pointing out that we were part of the NHS, even well, before the NHS started. The LMC was there, the local medical committee was there, because doctors still had issues. They had issues in relation to specialists, they had issues in relation to their private fees, how do they collect bills. But one of the biggest things that people saw as the best advantage for doctors of getting the NHS was not having to do debt collection. Go around collecting money off people who hadn't paid, because that was something doctors really hated. So that was one of the big advantages of going to the NHS. But because we were so fundamentally part of the NHS, it was written into the early legislation, we were part of the executive councils of the NHS. You know, so we've been a fundamental part of the whole structure of the NHS forever. And we actually have outlived almost all the other organisations, CHPs, HSCPs, health boards. We are much longer in the tooth than they are, and we've survived all the iterations of that. So it's important to put our place as a fundamental part of the NHS. It's often seen as them and us by a lot of management, and we would say we claim our place in the NHS as independent contractors who gather together to form a voice and influence the system to work better. And there are innumerable examples of how we have improved the system. This was a sort of hand drawing from way back in the early days of the NHS, and you don't need to pay much attention to it, but basically it just shows you even then, as soon as you started having a system that was run by the state, you had to have a complex structure above it. Until then there was basically the doctor taking money from a patient. That was the relationship and the organisational line. But as soon as you have a national structure run by the government, it had to be much more complicated. But you'll notice even there local committees of doctors were a feature, and they were a recognised feature, and they were embedded in the executive councils in the early days of the NHS. So that history is really important to realise. We've always been part of the NHS from the day it was started. And we will not allow ourselves to be pushed aside by other structures that will come and go with the wind, because we have proven ourselves over the test of time. But we have a new challenge, which is to make ourselves more effective in the modern world. And to be honest, we have been a bit slow. I think GPs in general, as a branch of the profession, have been slow to learn about influencing the system. Now, if you're a great doctor but you can't persuade any of your patients to do anything you say is a good idea, you're not much use to anybody. And that's exactly the same in the rest of healthcare. You may have the best ideas to make things work better, but if you're no good at communicating that and influencing it, you'll make no difference to anything. So, in the big world, the idea of influencing is a big thing, mainly in business, but also in government. So, but we're being a bit slow to think beyond how we work in our own practice. We tend to be quite insular that way, and I think it's been to our detriment over the years. So as much today is about getting outside of that narrow focus and seeing how do we influence the world to make it work better for us and our patients and our colleagues. It's also important to recognise the LMC is paid for by us. It's a voluntary thing in Scotland. Now that's a pretty good commendation for your colleagues, that they think it's worth having. You know, no one pays for the health board from their own pocket, but our colleagues pay us to spend time doing that. That's quite a big vote of confidence, and we mustn't forget that when we're standing to represent them, when people challenge our legitimacy. Excuse me, all our colleagues pay for me to do this. I have a strong mandate to do what I'm doing. That's what's different when you're in a representative position. You're also accountable to those colleagues and empowered by them. And you can be voted off if they decide you're getting it wrong, unlike many of the other people you'll be speaking at the table. So hang on to that representative function and deny others when they claim it. Because even clusters, which I've been involved in setting up, are not representative. They're basically appointed by people who can go. That's not the same as being representative. So it's a different kind of structure, and it was set up to be different. That's the only thing you can guarantee all your colleagues will agree with without taking a vote. So I never felt we ever had to take a vote on this, less work and more money. And I put that in to remember that while some things are pretty self-evident, and obviously in the LMC and GP, SGPC role, and BMA, there is a function of making sure that you get paid. And that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. And we have an element in the LMC side where it is important to make sure that GPs get paid. That's an important part in any structure. The health board thinks it's important, the government gives them money. We think it's important, we get money so we can pay ourselves and our staff. So that's a perfectly legitimate function. Now, many have accused us that focus has been too great since 2004, the profit motive. And so it's undermined our ability to represent in other ways. Everyone says you're just doing it, in it for the money. Less so in Scotland and England, but in England it's a big issue. Conflict of interest where you're both a provider, you've owned 3 different private companies and you're saying they should farm out this work to somebody else. So it's much more complicated in England, but it's never as complicated. But nonetheless, one of the ways that people attack what we do is it's just about getting GPs more money. Well, A, that's a legitimate thing to make sure we get what we're meant to get to do the service, but we are not now in the business of expanding our empire of profitability, because in fact it never really worked that well anyway. So we're broadly giving up that aspect. We want to get enough money to pay ourselves, meet our costs, and we'll argue for increases in that legitimately over time, but we're not going to look for piecework in the way that perhaps we did since 2004. So we need people to be like you, and you have to inspire others to be like you. So there's a lot of this about making sure we're future-proofing it, that people have to see you as an inspiration. So you have to be good at what you do, you have to believe in what you're doing, you have to have a passion for it, because people pick up that very quickly. If people think you really are committed and passionate about what you're doing, then A, they're more likely to take your word for it, and also they'll be inspired by you to go on. Because we need people to think it's important to do this kind of work. So we've focused a lot on, and in fact there's probably broad agreement now that general practice is the right kind of medicine for the future. Everyone's kind of agreed on that, but people don't want to let us define that future. There's a lot of resistance to that, and we'll talk a bit more about the interplay with management later. But it's quite good, we're in a good position just now when general practice is increasingly seen as the model of medicine for the future. So we must make sure that we retain our identity and our influence as that comes into the ascendancy. So the rise of the generalist is happening now. We need new approaches dealing with the new problems, and the whole contract is based on the idea we will handle demographic change. We realise that the hospital system is bust if it carries on as it is now, so we need to make sure general practice delivers the right medicine in the community. So that brings with it resources and opportunity, but it also brings challenges, and of course we're saying we're the right people, but other people say yes, but you'll do it our way. So there's a tension going on just now about who controls that. Now we've always managed general practice and what it is. And we mustn't let that go by being slow off the mark or unprofessional in the way that we approach influence and change. Now I think one of the ways to sum up general practice is just enough medicine to get the best outcome. We don't want to do over-medicalisation, over-diagnosis, over-treatment. We want to get just enough to get you sorted and get you back to your life without any more interference. And that's quite attractive to governments as well, because it costs money. Anything you do that doesn't actually make things better is a waste of money. And the government do not want to increase taxes to pay for the health service. So basically what they do want is to make what they've got have a better bang for its buck. And we take that approach anyway. We don't encourage people to come and see us more than they have to. We don't do more tests than we have to, although we have a slight tendency in that direction at the moment. But getting just enough medicine to get the best outcome, and that gives us an approach that should suit the NHS. So what do you need to be powerful and engaging? Well, you need to be engaged. You have to think this matters. The fact you're here means you're in that ballpark already. Probably you're here because something got to you. You thought, that's not right, that shouldn't happen like that. You know, how are we going to fix that? We can't just let this go on. That's the kind of thing that gets you into this in the first place. If you look back, there'll be something like that that's got you. You've got to feel engaged, you've got to think it matters in the first place. You've got to have a sense of self-esteem. You actually have to think that what you do is important and matters. And probably general practice until recently had one of the lowest levels of self-esteem as part of the profession for a long time. And our reputation in the other parts of medicine was probably at its lowest ebb. So we hope for coming out of that now, but building self-esteem to think what we do every day matters, the kind of medicine we practice really matters, and it's important. And it's equivalent to any other branch of medicine. These things are all key. We've got to speak that language and encourage our colleagues to think that way. Autonomy is important. You have the right to determine your future and how things develop, and you should be engaged in how general practice is developing and how it works in future, because otherwise it's not general practice if somebody else does it. If you look around England where there are new models of care, where big organisations like hospitals take over general practice, I don't think general practice will be the same at the end of that. It won't operate the same. Some of our colleagues have gone for big organisations. All these organisations, what they do is they break general practice into its component parts. So you have a doctor that does geriatrics, you've got a diabetic doctor, and you stop being a general practitioner. You're a doctor who works in primary care. I don't think there's any huge esteem within the profession for being a doctor who works in primary care, because if you're a diabetic doctor in general practice compared to a consultant, you can see where the esteem issues will arise. So it's fundamental that we maintain our autonomy and we drive forward the future of general practice, because we are the experts on it. Mastery is an important one. It's a concept which is mainly arisen in business, and it's partly how you learn the skills of being what we want you to be today about influencers. I was looking again, a guy, I think it's a guy called Robert Greene, who does the 40 Ways to Power, I think he calls it, there's all things like that, and there's a lot of literature out there about how do you learn the skills of what we're doing here. So he talks about things being an apprentice phase, where you just have to look and observe all the time, and you'll do this when you go to a new committee. You look and see where's the power, where's the influences, how does it work, what's the situation here, you know, and you get that. You spend time just looking and observing and finding. You come and do that at the LMC. This is not the time to come in and say, I've got the whole new way of doing everything. You know, because I've planned it all, because A, everyone will reject you, and you won't have the skills to take through. The next stage is learning the skills to actually make things happen, which is some of the stuff we've been doing recently, is saying, okay, you can sit and do the observing, but then you have to start learning the actual skills. And it's much easier to be taught them than to just pick them up by accident over a much longer period of time. This is when you're doing your 10,000 hours of skills. So we're talking mainly about the skills outside the consulting room, because you have to do that for clinical medicine, but to do the other parts of medicine that we're now talking about, there are hours of skill gathering to be done in that. And then finally you get to mastery, where you're able to use all those things together in a subtle way to bring about change. And I would claim that's what I've done, because I've been in this business 30 years, and we only brought in the big change last year. So it's a slow burn. But I've done my 10,000 hours of influencing and change easily, and some over those years. So I missed one out, didn't I? Purpose. You have to have a reason for what you want to do. And so even when you go along to a committee, there's got to be a reason why you're there. Sometimes it's what we used to say, it's to stop heresy, to stop bad things happening to general practice. And that might be enough for that purpose, for that meeting, because it doesn't have anything else. Other times you want to go there so that when you leave it, the situation is better than when you first went. To make a difference where there's a difference can be made is an important thing. So you've got to think, why am I going here? It should be better when I've finished with it than when I started. You probably know about the stages of competence. I think most people do this. So you go from not knowing what you don't know, which is the unconscious incompetence. So you don't know just now that you're not good at this yet. Then you go to conscious incompetence and think, oh my God, I'm really not very good at this. I've been trying this for ages. And then you go to conscious competence where you can do it, but it's really hard work and you've really put a lot of effort into it. And then eventually it comes naturally to you. So it just becomes a habit. And I think that's probably true of my behaviour and committing things. It's just, I don't know, it's not, it seems effortless, it's not quite, but I don't have to consciously think about it because I've been doing it for so long. And these are all parts of getting to mastery. But you have to recognise there's a journey there, and you don't start off by trying to introduce massive change. If I'd said, I don't know, 15 years ago we're going to have a whole new GP contract, no one would listen to me. And why should they? because I hadn't thought it through enough then. I hadn't developed influencing skills, I hadn't learned which buttons to push, which way to go there. So you have to go through all these phases to learn the skills of influencing and mastering change. And many of you are already clocking up your 10,000 hours and you're building up your skill sets. And that's what we want you to do so that you can have a bigger impact and make a bigger difference. So that you feel empowered. Because one of the big things about representation is that when I used to stand in front of the government, I was representing 4,000 GPs. That's quite a strong mandate. Okay? So when you do it locally, you're doing it for other GPs in Glasgow and Clyde. And you have to remember that. You're not there as yourself. You're there at the front and representing those people. That's what empowers you. And by your view is a representative one. So when a CD or somebody else challenges that, you don't take it. I'm sorry, I am the representative. This is what I do. I represent all these GPs on this issue. Because people will challenge. It's important to know and have that in your back of your mind. You're not just you there as you. You're on behalf of these people. So you can make a difference, and you have to believe that too. But it's learning about how to do that more effectively. So to do that, you need time. Now, we'll all be kind of aware now of how you have to engineer time within your life, like a Saturday afternoon to come here. How to engineer time outside of your practice. And it is maybe something that we need to spend some time on about how do you organise that and make sure it doesn't damage you. Because I probably did damage my practice just before I became chairman and went part-time because I hadn't quite got that sorted. So you have to think about over a career, how can I contribute to this in a way that doesn't damage me, my practice, or indeed my family life. You need training because it takes a long time just to acquire stuff by accident. You probably can, and probably that's a traditional way in LMCs that people learn. They accidentally happen to see this and they watch that. But we're getting more into this concept that we need to train ourselves to do these things. You need authority. To be able to speak with authority is important. If you're just there as yourself in amongst 30, and I've frequently said, I think Hilary, I've been saying, you're not just sitting there as 1 out of 30. You're the other side of the yes-no. So you're 50% of that, even though you're there yourself. Because you come with the authority of a veto, which is in this agreement. We say whether this is okay or not as the LMC, and the board says, oh, that's it. They may have many more people there, but it's a 50-50 split of power. You also need information. We'll often be very weak on this. So you need to, the more stuff you know, I have the advantage, I probably know more about the NHS and general practice than anybody in the health board. And you're probably getting there yourself. You know more about general practice. But demonstrating your knowledge of the information about the world you live in is power. And we've been very weak, for example, on numbers of appointments and things like that. So we're starting to see that come through now. One of the health board papers showed recently the number of prescriptions, the number of GP appointments. And I think the GP appointments was about 7 million, just as an estimate. In England, it was 30.7 million appointments last year. We're usually 10% of that in Scotland. So that's 10 million appointments a year. That's vastly more than any other service gets involved in. So we need to start getting the information to demonstrate the power of what we do. But we do need you to be leaders in the new world. And there are different kinds of leadership. You have to demonstrate your intelligence. That shouldn't be difficult. But you shouldn't be afraid of showing it by your ability to analyse what's going on. You do need to be honest. The slightest whiff of impropriety, dishonesty, or indeed greed, and your power to influence plummets, certainly in our world in public service. Less so if you're working in a purely commercial world, but we don't. So you have to be aware that honesty is an important thing. You do have to be creative. Now you don't get to be creative, we're talking early in different stages, until you reach the mastery level, because trying to be creative too early on, there's all sorts of reasons psychologically why that won't work. You've got to build other people's trust in you, you've got to get the skill sets, demonstrate your ability, and then you can start being creative, because people are likely to listen to what you say. You have to be confident, so you have to get familiar with working in unfamiliar environments. You do have to be driven. Yeah, if we had ever, we could have given up so many times in what we did, but we kept driving forward against all the odds, constantly being creative, trying to find the solutions that we came across, and that drive was absolutely essential to get us where we are now. So therefore you also have to be courageous. And so that's what leaders have to be. And we need you to be leaders both within your local area, to lead your clinical teams that we're now expanding, and most GPs are going to have to learn to be leaders. We've expressly said it's a medical leadership model. Now that had gone out of the NHS for a long time. Doctors were not allowed to be leaders and were disempowered. We've now agreed a medical leadership model, but it's not the type where you act like somebody's boss and you kick them and shout at them and all that kind of stuff, that's not the kind of leadership you need. It's the ability to influence teams to get them to deliver better outcomes, because you acquire the authority by trust and demonstrating your skills and your effectiveness and your honesty and all those other things that makes people believe in you as a team. Don't spend too long on this, but I'm always going on about a guy called Don Berry, who's a thinker in America, and he mainly works in the commercial environment, but he did a great talk on the 3 years of medicine. The first one being doctors were in charge. So doctors ran the NHS in the early days, the medical superintendent or whatever. So it was trust me, I'm a doctor. And that worked okay, but there was a lot of examples of where it didn't work well. So they went into era 2, which was I don't trust you because you're a doctor, tick some boxes and I'll give you some money. And that was the area of what they call new general management, public general management came in, where the idea was it was all about management driving the health service. He argued that there should be an era 3, where it's a genuine partnership between clinicians and managers. And I genuinely believe this is what we need for the health service to work. That means that we're not in charge, we don't have all the power. But we should be able to work equally with management to make things work, because I don't think they can make it work. We've clearly demonstrated that general management on its own does not work well. But that's not a universally accepted concept. But one of the things I point out here is the one about protecting civility, because he also talks about the language that we use in the health service is often one of the boxing round. We're often fighting with each other, even amongst the profession. It's quite an aggressive, I'm bigger and stronger than you. We get it with CDs, we get it with CKLs, we get it with focus groups, we get, there's all this kind of macho posturing. He would suggest that it's far better that we take the manners of the dinner table, got someone here today. It's a much better way to deal with health service. So you can be strong, you can be powerful, you can be influential, but you don't have to be rude, you don't have to dominate people, you don't have to overcome, you don't have to insist on having all the power. So to some extent we are saying we need to lead by that example, which is quite hard, because when you get some power it's easy to say, I've got the boots on my foot and I'll kick you back after you've been kicking me for years. And that's happened between fund holding and everything over the years. So we're going to try and do this in a civil but strong way going forward. So we sit in our surgeries and we do our clinical work, and that's the main reason we decided to become doctors. And it matters, and it really does matter, which is why the rest matters as well, because you can only do that if the rest of the system works. We need you to become leaders of your local multidisciplinary teams in the modern way of leadership. So it's quite clear to everyone that you have to take on your role, which is to improve the outcomes for your patients, and they see you as the person whose job it is to do that, and they accept the leadership that gets them to those outcomes. But we're all sitting in a consulting room separately. If we just did that again, we'd have little influence on the system. So we've got the LMC and GP Sub, where we get together, and it's always been a sophisticated response to a complex environment. No one else understands the nature of general practice, because the health boards don't realise the issues of premises, the political things. We're the ones who've changed the contract over here, not the local health boards. So we have had huge influence on how the NHS and general practice works. And we're trying increasingly to say we'll work in partnership with local management to improve that as well. So we invented the concept of a tripartite committee. Now, it was never the best term. I always thought we'd get a better one, but we never have. But we had to, with introducing clusters to deal with quality, we had to find a way to give a stronger way to represent medical views to the health service. Because if we should be talking to the commissioners, that's basically the health and social care partnerships, decide how to spend the money on local services, decide how to spend the money technically in secondary care. But the trouble is, what they usually do is they get the GP who thinks what they think is right and get them to come and say the GPs agree with us. So what we've said is we need to get all the GPs who are influential in the one room and say, do we have an agreed position on how the service should be commissioned? At the moment we've probably created 3 different clusters. We've got GP Sub, we've got clusters, and we've got clinical directors, all who could have a view on how things should run. We said, well, let's bring them together into a tripartite committee, and its sole job is to talk about clinical pathways and commission. It's not replacing the GP Sub or the area medical committee or doing any of that at all. It's just about quality and outcomes, clinical pathways, and how the services should, how the money should be spent on the services to improve outcomes for patients. There is a challenging in Glasgow because the management think they can create this into replacing the advisory structure. And the answer is it can't, because we've got one representative group, we've got one group who are just sent from the practice, we've got clinical directors who are employed. And I think it's really important we bring the managers back into the family, because they are our professionals within the system. We need someone to go out and make things happen in between meetings. So we need our clinical directors to be part of our medical fraternity. To get more effective as a profession, we have to get together. So the idea that we set up was the GP Subcommittee would bring together these people to form a tripartite committee to give universal advice for the whole area. This isn't just your local area, on clinical pathways and commissioning advice. Now it does tread a bit on some of the work of the GP Subcommittee, but that's okay, because we're not the only group of views, so we're okay to share that. But it's not about spreading our general advice to the board, which still comes in its normal way. During all this, you have to remember the rest of your life. It's all about having a happy life. Doing this kind of work, I would say, adds a lot of richness to your life. It takes a lot of your time, but it brings a lot of interest and stimulation, because you're all very intelligent people, and I would say just staying in your consulting room is not enough of a way to keep your intellect happy, and will help to save your frustration when things don't go right, if you're out there trying to make it work better. So, hopefully we're all about helping GPs to be at the top of our game. Thank you very much.